If you scream, I'll do the same to your mother, and her debt will never end, and I'll come collect from you every day," he said, touching my face as if it were affection, but it hurt more than a slap. "My name is Darlene Sue Whitaker. I'm 72 years old, from Poteau, Oklahoma, and what I'm about to tell you is not a sad invention, nor the exaggeration of a needy old woman. I was only 12 when my mother lost her job at the town laundry. She did everything right, never missed a day, but the boss found a niece to take her place. That's how it is in small towns, where it's not justice that rules, but family name. And when you're poor and a woman on your own, no one cares why. We were already struggling, my dear, but when that salary stopped coming in, it was as if the ground had disappeared. My mother spent 2 nights without sleep, walking around the house with a dishcloth in her hand, as if that would solve something. There was no point in crying. She wasn't like that. She just became quieter, more wilted. On the 3rd day, Rick showed up. Rick Dougherty, owner of a car repair shop on the side of the road. He always wore suspenders and had a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, even when it wasn't lit. He came with the face of a good Samaritan. "I heard you have some bills to pay. I can help, Mrs. Mary," just like that, pretending to be polite. My mother, poor thing, grabbed Hope with both hands. She accepted the money. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put food on the table for a while. But with a man like that, nothing is free. The first time was 5 days later. My mother had gone out to try to find a job at a salon. I was washing the dishes when he showed up in the kitchen without knocking, as if the house were his. And in a way, it became his. He came in with that soft voice. "I just came to see if you're all right." I didn't know what he wanted, but I understood when he locked the door, when he put his hand on my shoulder with force, when he said, in a low but firm voice, "Now you're going to help your mother pay what she owes." I didn't cry, not in front of him, because I knew that if I cried it would be worse. After he left, I sat on the kitchen floor, my hands red from clenching them so tightly. I didn't understand exactly what had happened, but I knew it wasn't right. I knew it hurt, and that it wouldn't end there. And it didn't end. It became routine. My mother, always thinking that Rick was just a good man helping us, and me, pretending that everything was fine. She looked at me with those deep eyes, but never asked. And I didn't say anything either, because he made it very clear what would happen if I spoke. "If you talk, I'll do to your mother what I do to you." After that, my fear was no longer for myself. I slept clutching a thin pillow, trying to think of anything other than the living room door opening again. Sometimes he didn't even wait for my mother to leave. He just found a way to pull me into the back room when she was busy in the kitchen or in the yard. And then it happened. It happened as if I weren't human, as if I were a debt with legs. Over time, my body became just another part of the bill. And my mother, she withered away. I don't know if she knew. Maybe she suspected. Maybe that empty look in her eyes was more than sadness. It was guilt. But no one spoke. No one ever speaks. Because in a small town, whoever reports it becomes the problem. I started skipping school. I said I was sick. But the truth is, I couldn't look at other people. I felt dirty, as if everyone knew. The teacher once asked if everything was okay. I said yes, and she pretended to believe me. No one wants to know the real truth. But one afternoon, something different happened. I was sweeping the front of the house when I saw him coming. Only he wasn't alone. He was with a younger man, probably around 20 years old. "This is my nephew. He's going to be staying in town for a while." And he looked at me with that crooked smile. "You two are going to get along great." That's when I knew. It was going to get worse. If you've made it this far, my dear, leave your like. Each like is like a hug for this old woman who still trembles just remembering. The day he brought that nephew, my stomach turned inside out. The boy's name was Jesse, a quiet type who just stared, but with a piercing gaze. He stood in the corner while Rick talked, just watching, as if he had already heard too many instructions in the car before getting out. I pretended I didn't see, that I didn't understand. But inside, I knew. It wasn't a visit. It was preparation. At first, he only showed up with Rick, standing near the fence or sitting on the porch as if waiting for something. A week later, Rick started leaving earlier, leaving Jesse there with the excuse that he was going to get a part, a receipt, any lie. And every time he left, I felt my legs go weak. The first time Jesse tried to approach me, he came up with silly small talk. He asked if I liked to draw. I just nodded. Then he asked if I had a boyfriend. I pretended not to hear him. And then he said, in a tone that sounded like he was joking, "Your body is already that of an adult. You should know what to do with it." I froze. I froze so much that I didn't even drop the broom from my hand. From that day on, he started to get more relaxed. He would run his hand down my back when he passed by me. He would laugh when I walked away. He called me Peach, sweet thing, as if there were some affection in it. But I could feel the intention behind the words. And every day, he took another step forward, until the day Rick grabbed me by the arm, took me to the back of the house and said, "Today you're going to learn to share. He's family." My heart almost stopped. I didn't say anything, because it was useless. His threat was already engraved in me, deeper than any words. I just did what he told me to do because I had no choice. Jesse walked into the room without looking at me, as if he already knew what to do. I just closed my eyes and left my mind, leaving my body there and hiding inside myself, because it was the only way to survive. After that, it became a rule. Every time Rick didn't come, the other one came. And sometimes both of them. I won't go into detail because it's not something you talk about, but there are parts of the body that forget how to breathe. There are souls that learn to leave themselves so they don't die completely. My mother still didn't know, or pretended not to know. She started to keep herself busier, sewing for others, tending the garden, doing everything she could to keep her mind off things. But her body no longer walked upright. And her smile, that little smile she gave when she saw a bird in the yard, disappeared. I would walk past her and smell the scent of despair mixed with laundry soap. One day I accidentally knocked a glass into the sink. She screamed so loud that even the neighbor must have heard. But it wasn't because of the glass. It was because of everything she knew but couldn't name. And then one time we had a visit from her sister, Aunt Ethel, a tough woman with her hair tied back and a firm voice. She sat with me on the sofa and stared at me. She didn't ask anything directly. She just said, "You look older than you should." I didn't answer, but inside, part of me wanted to scream. Maybe if she had insisted, I would have said something. But she didn't insist. She just left the next day and never came back. At school, I wasn't even called by my name anymore. I became the girl who walked hunched over, who avoided contact. A teacher tried to talk to me again, but this time I made up a stomachache and asked to leave. I didn't want to deal with questions anymore. It was easier to endure the pain than the pitying looks. Jesse started coming, even when Rick didn't tell him to. He said he liked me, that I was good at keeping quiet. I thought about running away. I even put some clothes in a bag. But I was a coward. I stood at the door for hours, afraid of what might happen to my mother if I disappeared, because I knew they would come after her, and he had already warned me. "If you run away, I'll come back here, and she'll pay for it." So I stayed. I stayed out of love, out of fear, out of guilt. I don't even know which of the three anymore. And time went by, with each week feeling like a month, each month turning into a lifetime, until one night my mother came into my room, quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed. She sat there, silently, with her hand on the sheet, without touching it. And she said, "You don't have to say anything. I already know." I froze, not because I had been discovered, but because that "I already know" was the most terrible thing I could hear. It meant she knew, and yet she did nothing. I turned my face away and waited for her to leave. But she stayed there, as if she wanted to hear an apology that didn't exist. After that, she started drinking. Not much, just a glass of cheap whiskey before bed. But that was her cry. And we started living like two ghosts in the same house, each with her own pain, and the two monsters kept coming, as if nothing had happened. But one day, something I didn't expect happened. A neighbor, Mrs. Jeannie, showed up with a bag of bread, and, as she handed it to me, she held my wrist longer than necessary. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You know there are people who see, right? That's all." But it was like a breath of fresh air, a sign. Maybe I wasn't so alone after all. That phrase stayed in my head for days, and it was that phrase that started to light a flame inside me. It was still weak, but it was something, because after so long living as a shadow, I started to think, what if I did something? After that phrase from Mrs. Jeannie, my head was no longer at peace. You know there are people who see, right? It kept hammering like a drop on a tin roof, dripping slowly but steadily. And the more I tried to forget, the more it echoed. I didn't know if she was talking about the neighborhood, if it was just a way of saying she noticed, or if it was a warning. But for the first time in a long time, I began to feel that maybe I wasn't invisible. And that, my dear, is dangerous. Because when we start to feel seen, we also begin to imagine that we can come out of the dark. I spent days walking around the house with a heavy heart. Jesse came around less now, maybe out of laziness, maybe because he already took me for granted. But Rick remained steadfast, always with that air of ownership, owner of everything, owner of the house, of me, even of my breath. Only I wasn't the same anymore. I was awake inside, and when the soul awakens, the body can no longer bear to be just a repository of suffering. On one of those afternoons, when he showed up without knocking, as he always did, I was in the kitchen. My mother was in the yard washing clothes, her face turned to the other side of the world. He came in and stood behind me, saying nothing, just breathing heavily. I didn't turn around, not out of courage, but because I was tired of pretending to be surprised. He approached me and did what he always did, only this time, at the end, he said something different. You should thank me. If it weren't for me, you and your mother would be begging for money on the street corner. That hit me hard. I didn't answer, but it was at that moment that I realized I had nothing left to lose, because what he stole wasn't just my body, it was my name, my existence, my peace, and no one survives long being nothing. That night, I lay awake with my eyes open, my pillow wet and my head boiling. I didn't have a plan, but I had a new desire, something that made my chest ache, not with sadness, but with rage. I started to observe more, to pay attention to schedules, footsteps, random words. I saw that Rick kept a set of keys in his car, and one of those keys opened his workshop, which was almost abandoned at night. I waited 3 weeks. 3, because I knew that if I did anything rash, I would be blamed. And when I finally saw my chance, I took it. It was on a Friday, around 8 o'clock at night. He had left his truck parked further away, with the window slightly open. I took the keys without him noticing, hid them in a plastic bag, and buried them behind the chicken coop. The next day, I went to the workshop at lunchtime. My mother thought I had gone to buy bread. The building was small, dirty, smelling of old oil and smoke. I opened the back door and went in. I started rummaging through the drawers and cabinets. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to find something that would pin him against the wall. That's where I found a locked metal box. I took it with me. I spent days trying to open it with a hairpin, a knife, until I finally succeeded. Inside there were envelopes, lots of them, some with photos of other girls, some I didn't even know, others I remembered seeing before, and papers, receipts, letters, bills, things that showed that Rick did more than just lend money. At that moment, my world turned upside down again, because I realized I wasn't unique. I wasn't special. I was just another one of many, and that disgusted me. But it also gave me a strange strength, because if he did it to others, then maybe someone would want to listen. Maybe someone would care. Maybe one of those families would want justice. I put everything back in the box, buried it in the same hole as the keys, and I waited, because I knew I couldn't act alone. I needed someone stronger than me, or at least someone with a voice, and the only person who came to mind was Mrs. Jeannie, not because she was close to me, but because she had already seen it, and seeing is the first step to acting. I spent days rehearsing what to say, but in the end, I said almost nothing. I just showed up at her house with sunken eyes and trembling hands. She looked at me, motioned for me to come in, and gave me a glass of water. When I handed her the box and said, "It's all here," she didn't ask any questions. She just opened it, saw what was inside, and remained silent for a long time. But it was a different kind of silence, not one of omission. It was the silence of someone processing the bombshell that had just dropped in their lap. The next day, Rick didn't show up at home or in town. They said he had left in a hurry, that someone in the family was sick. But I knew that wasn't it. Mrs. Jeannie had made a move. I don't know who she talked to, but his disappearance was like breathing after a long time underwater. But the joy was short-lived, because Jesse showed up soon after, alone. He banged on the door hard, eyes wide, and asked, "Where is he? What did you do to him?" My mother was paralyzed, so was I, but I didn't answer. He left snorting, and I knew the storm was just beginning. 3 nights later, someone threw a rock at our window. Everything shattered. Inside the house, there was only the sound of breaking glass and my mother's scream. When we looked through the curtain, we saw Jesse's truck disappearing at the end of the road. It was a warning. It was anger. After the rock in the window, the world became a smaller place. Every step I took inside that house felt tighter, as if the walls knew what was coming. My mother started sleeping fully clothed with the kitchen light on. She said it was because of the rats, but I could see the fear in the way she double-locked the door, in the sound of her breathing becoming shorter every time it got dark. And me, well, I no longer knew if what was running through me was courage or just despair by another name. Mrs. Jeannie called me to her porch 2 days later. She handed me an envelope and said only, "You keep it. If anything happens to me, give it to Mrs. Bett at the City Hall office. She knows what to do." I didn't have the courage to ask what was inside, but I took it with both hands, put it in my coat pocket, and promised I would take care of it. And I did. I hid it inside an old coffee can, buried it behind the well with a rock on top to mark it. Because now I knew that information was a weapon, and a weapon in that game was the only way not to die. Rumors began to spread. They said Rick had been seen in Broken Bow, hiding in a small room in a boarding house. Others said he had fled to Arkansas. But what really scared me was the silence of the police. No one knocked on our door, no patrol cars circling around, as if everything had evaporated, as if it were nobody's business. But I knew it wasn't just omission, it was fear. Rick had friends everywhere, officers, pastors, even gas station owners, people who owed favors, people who owed secrets. The following week, Jesse showed up again. This time, he didn't knock. He broke the lock on the chicken coop, entered the yard, broke the fence, and shouted my name, loudly, several times. My mother hid behind the stove. I stood by the window, watching him spin around like a trapped animal. "You think you've won something?" he shouted. "You've ruined everything. You'll pay for this, you hear me?" When he left the gate open and the chickens scattered in the bushes. I spent the night collecting them one by one without speaking, my hands shaking so much that I let 3 escape. That's when my mother finally spoke. She stood in the doorway, her face cut in half by the shadow, and said, "We need to get out of here." But it was too late. At that point, leaving was no longer escape. It was defeat, and I, after all, was not willing to run. I had spent so much time being weak that when the strength came, it came like a rock rolling down a hill. There was no turning back. I said to her, "If we go, he wins. And he's already won too much." She looked at me as if she didn't recognize me, as if she had discovered another person in that daughter who never asked anything. That night, we slept with the furniture against the doors. The house became a trench. Every creak was suspicious. Every headlight in the distance was a threat. Fear went hand in hand with hope, the two alternating with each passing hour. But hope began to weigh heavily. I no longer wanted to just survive. I wanted revenge. Not the bloody kind, not the kind you see in movies. I wanted him to know that I remembered, that I was still there, and that I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. That's when I thought of writing. I grabbed an old notebook, a half-dry pen, sat on the floor of my room and started. A letter. No name, no address, just words. I wrote what he did, how he came in, what he said, what he threatened. I talked about Jesse, the schedules, the marks that no one saw, everything. 3 pages. I folded it neatly, put it in a yellow envelope, and wrote, "To whoever cares." I left at dawn and put it in the school mailbox. Someone would find it, and if they did, maybe they would do something. I woke up the next day feeling different, as if a weight had been lifted, but also with a knot in my stomach, because doing something also means inviting danger, and danger is quick to respond. That same afternoon, I saw a strange car circling the street. I had never seen it before. It wasn't Jesse's or Rex's. It was black, unmarked, with tinted windows. It drove slowly, as if looking for something or someone. Then it drove by again and again. My mother wanted to call the police. I said it was no use. I slept little that night. I dreamed of fire, of screams. I woke up sweaty, my mouth dry. And when I went to the kitchen, the back door was open, not broken, just unlocked, as if someone had entered and left without haste, without noise. There was a chicken feather on the floor and a note stuck to the wall with tape. Just 3 words. That's all. I showed it to my mother. She turned pale. She sat on the floor and stayed there, hugging her knees like a child. I took the note, burned it in the sink, and flushed the ashes down the drain, because now there was no point in keeping the warning. They had already crossed the line, and so had I. I spent the next day trying to decide what to do. Going back to the workshop was risky. Seeking help in town was even worse. But then I had an idea, the kind that comes when you're about to break. If Rick was gone and Jesse was trying to cover his tracks, then maybe what I had already buried was enough. Maybe what I had already handed over was more disturbing than I thought. And it was. That morning after the note was stuck on the wall, the house felt different. The air inside was heavy, as if everything was in the wrong place, as if even the pots and pans knew someone was lurking around. My mother swept the floor incessantly, sweeping as if she could clean the fear from the floor, the shame from the wood. I sat looking through the crack in the window waiting for more, because after that's all, it's never all. Never. It took 2 days for the next step. Mrs. Jeannie didn't show up anymore, not on the porch, not to take care of the plants she loved so much. That gave me a knot in my stomach. I tried to hide it, tried to believe it was just a coincidence, but deep down I knew something had happened. On the 3rd day, I went to her house. I knocked, waited, called out. Nothing. I stood there, staring at the closed door until a neighbor, Mrs. Claudette, approached and said quietly she went to her daughter's house in Fort Smith. They said she was going to spend some time there. I thanked her, but inside I trembled, because Jeannie wasn't the type to leave like that, much less without warning, much less right now. I went home feeling like I was walking barefoot on gravel. Every step, an alert. Every silence, a trap. I went straight to the hole in the ground where I hid the envelope. I dug up the dirt, took out the can, checked. It was still there, intact. At least that same week, 2 girls from school disappeared. 2. The town panicked. But it was that quiet, restrained panic, the kind no one wants to admit they really know. They said they had run away with boyfriends, that they were rebels, that it was television's fault. But I knew. I looked at the adults' faces and saw that they knew too. They just didn't want to name the monster, because naming it meant facing it. And facing it, in that place, was the same as signing your own death warrant. I started writing again. More letters, more reports. I left them in different places. In the church mailbox, behind the park bench, inside a book in the library. Always unsigned, always with too many details to be a lie. I hoped something would happen, that someone would put it all together, that they would do something, but nothing came, nothing changed. Only the feeling that they were watching more and more closely. One night, coming back from the store, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't see anyone, but I could feel them. I felt them on my neck, on my back, in that unmistakable chill. I ran. I entered the house panting, locking everything. My mother looked at me with wide eyes. I just said, "They're here," and she didn't ask who. She just nodded, because she already knew too. We decided to sleep in the back room, a mattress on the floor, the door propped open with a wardrobe. My mother prayed softly, something she had never done before. I pretended to sleep, but I listened. Every word was like a knife. Protect my daughter. Free her from this evil. Don't let them take her from me. And there I was, eyes closed, wanting to scream that they had taken her long ago, that what was there was just a shell. The following days were slower. Jessie disappeared. No knocking on the door, no broken glass, no strange visitors. But that was no relief. It was the calm before the storm. I began to suspect that they were planning something. They didn't know yet who was spreading the letters, but they knew it was coming from within, and that made them nervous, because secrets are good as long as they remain in the dark. When they start walking the streets, they become too dangerous. One Sunday afternoon, I received a note, this time by mail. No sender, white envelope. Inside, just a sheet of paper with 3 lines. You think you've won, but it's a small town. We always find out who talks too much. My mother read it with me. Then she tore it into tiny pieces and threw it in the toilet. She said, "They think they have everything, but they're just afraid. That's why they threaten us." And in that moment, I saw something in her that I had never seen before. Anger. Not fear, not sadness. Anger. And that's when I realized that she had woken up too. Late, but she woke up. We went to church the next day, for the first time in months. No one looked us in the eye, just whispers, fake smiles, cold hands, but our presence bothered them, and that was what I wanted. They could do whatever they wanted in the dark, but they couldn't stand it when we showed ourselves in broad daylight, because the shame there was always on the victim, and I was tired of bowing my head. The entire Mass was a rehearsal for war. The pastor spoke of forgiveness, sin, silence, and all I could think was that the pulpit was where they hid, people who preached peace with hands stained with threats. We left with our backs straight and, for the first time, with our heads held high. That night I felt that something was coming. I didn't know what, but I could feel it, as if the end of a cycle was near, as if something big was about to happen, the kind of thing that changes everything. But I also knew that before the end, there is always one last blow. It was on a Wednesday, late in the afternoon, that my mother asked to talk to me. We were sitting on the porch, the sun setting behind the dry trees, and she had that distant look she always had, only now it seemed more determined. She said she needed to tell me something. Her voice was low, as if she were afraid of being heard by her own mouth. I felt my stomach churn before she even started, because when a mother takes so long to speak, it's because what's coming is painful. She said she knew Rick from before, that he didn't show up just because of the debt, that he had been around us long before we realized it. She said that years ago, when she was still married to my father, Rick used to frequent the family workshop that my grandfather had left for my father to run. She said he was already weird, that he was always getting into arguments, that he always had a fake smile and lingered his gaze on young girls. My father, according to her, didn't like him, but no one had the courage to say anything, because Rick was always the kind of man who knew people no one else wanted to know. When my father died, hit by a car on a bend in the road, with no witnesses and no tire marks, she thought it was strange. She said the car was too intact, that the police closed the case too quickly, and that Rick showed up at the funeral with a compassionate look on his face, bringing a basket of groceries and an envelope with money. "To help," he said, and that's how he got in. My mother never told me this before, not because she didn't trust me, but because she thought she was protecting me. And maybe she was. Maybe it was her way of trying to keep her head above water in a sea that only pulled her down. But at that moment, listening to everything, I felt more anger than relief. Because if she knew from the beginning what kind of man he was, why did she let him in again? Why did she accept the money? Why didn't she take me away from there at the first sign? She cried. For the first time in years, she cried in front of me. She apologized without using the word apology. She said she didn't know what to do, that fear swallows us up in a way that we don't even realize when we've stopped fighting, and that every time she saw me come home from school, quieter, harder, her heart ached, but she pretended it was just a phase, part of adolescence, because it was easier to pretend than to face it. And now she wanted to fix it, but she didn't know how. I listened to everything in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't have the strength to speak. I stared at her, at those hands that had worked too hard, at that face that had aged 10 years in 2, and all I could think was that maybe we really didn't know how to fix anything, that maybe what was broken stayed broken. But I also understood that she was trying, and sometimes trying is all that's left. That night, we decided we couldn't wait for the next scare. We had to be the ones to take the step, whatever it was. We took the papers, the letters, the photos, everything I had kept. We spread them out on the kitchen table as if they were pieces of a macabre puzzle. And there, in the middle of it all, my mother saw what I had written, saw the girls in the photos, saw what Rick did with others, not just with me, and then she stood up, her face white as flour, and said, "We're going to expose everything, even if it hurts." The next day, we went to the house of Mrs. Bett, the woman from City Hall that Mrs. Jeannie had mentioned. We clapped our hands and waited. When she appeared at the door, her hair tied back and wearing an apron covered in flour, she didn't even need to say anything. Just by looking at us, she understood. We went in, sat down, and handed her everything. She read in silence. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't interrupt. She just read. At the end, she put everything in a leather folder and said, "I'm going to take this forward. It's going to hurt. It's going to be a scandal, but it's going to happen." I went home feeling like I had done something right for the first time in years, as if even without knowing the end, the beginning was enough. But of course, joy is short-lived around here. 3 days later, we woke up to a cross painted on our door. Red, crude, dripping paint onto the floor, as if it were blood. My mother was speechless. I was filled with hatred. One neighbor pretended not to see it. Another passed by quickly, pulling his son by the arm. And the whole city began to show its true colors. It didn't take long for the rumors to start, that I was making it up, that my mother wanted money, that we were trying to ruin the reputation of good men. Good men, they always use that phrase, because all you need is a business, a house, a clean suit, and it becomes a shield. And poor women, silent with difficult pasts, they become lies. But I didn't stop. I kept writing. I kept spreading the word. I kept looking them in the eye. And that bothered them more than any letter, because people who are used to hiding things don't know how to deal with someone who looks back at them. The city began to divide. Some pretended they knew nothing. Others whispered in corners. But there was a group, small but steadfast, that began to show up at our door. Women, mothers, girls. Some just held my hand. Others brought hidden notes, similar stories, old fears. And then I knew I wasn't alone. I was just the first to shout. The day started too calmly, and that was already a warning. After so long living on the edge of fear, we learned that silence is treacherous. I woke up to the crowing of roosters, the same as always, but without the noise of the city in the background. There was no laughter from neighbors, no passing truck engines, no hurried footsteps on the street. It seemed like the world was holding its breath, and I should have understood right away that it was the eve of disaster. My mother made coffee as she did every day, but she dropped the bottle twice. Her hand was shaking so much it looked like she had a fever. I pretended not to notice. I drank the cold liquid, chewed the stale bread, and stared at the clock on the wall, its slow ticking, as if waiting for it to tell me when it would happen, but it didn't. The clock never warns you. It was only after lunch that it started. First was the sound of the gate slamming. I thought it was the wind, until I heard the second bang, louder, followed by a creak that didn't come alone. I ran to the living room and looked through the curtain. 3 men. None of them were Rick. None were Jesse. But they all had the same look, that of someone who came with a dirty mission and knows that no one will stop them. All dressed as ordinary workers, worn jeans, caps on their heads, but with the posture of wild animals. My mother pulled me by the arm, pushed me into the back room, locked the door, and said only one thing: "Stay quiet. For everything you love, don't open it." I obeyed. I crouched in the corner, my ear pressed against the thin wall, and listened to their every step inside the house. I heard the voices, the heavy words, the sound of something falling on the kitchen floor. A glass perhaps, a plate. I also heard when my mother answered, her voice firm but trembling, asking what they wanted. The answer was just a slap. I know the sound. I grew up hearing it. It took longer than it should have. They turned everything upside down. They knocked over drawers, kicked doors, tore sheets. They were looking for something. I didn't know what, but I suspected. Maybe they wanted the papers, the evidence, the letters, or maybe they just wanted to send a message to show that I could write whatever I wanted, but that there, in that corner of the world, they were in charge. After a while, I heard footsteps closer, very close. The bedroom door handle turned. They knew. They had heard me, or sensed me. Someone muttered something, then a strong kick made the wood shake. The lock gave way, only halfway. My mother shouted from the living room, something I didn't understand. They hesitated, but they insisted. One more knock, and the door opened. I was in the corner, trembling, with a piece of wood in my hand. It was a broken chair leg. Ridiculous, pathetic. but it was all I had. One of them came in, looked at me with disgust as if I were a cockroach. He said, "You want to play grown-up, huh? Well, now you're going to learn." I raised my arm, not to hit him, but to protect myself. And that's when Mrs. Jeannie appeared. Out of nowhere, she appeared at the entrance, with a roll of paper in her hand and a man in a suit behind her. A lawyer, perhaps, or someone from City Hall. I still don't know. All I know is that she shouted with a force that didn't seem to come from that small body. "Get out of this house now. This place is being watched. Every second you spend here is being recorded." And oddly enough, they backed off. One of them snorted, another spat on the floor, but they all left, without saying another word. I remained there, sitting on the floor, my arm bleeding from a scratch, my breathing uneven, and a new certainty sprouting inside my chest. They were afraid, not of justice, nor of the police. It was the noise, the scandal, because what these men value most is a clean name in a small town. Jeannie helped me up, looked me in the eyes and said, "You did what none of us had the courage to do. Now they're going to want to destroy you, but you're not alone." And at that moment, I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I couldn't. I was numb, as if my body had disconnected from my soul, but something in me believed her. In the days that followed, more people showed up, simple people, women who lived at the end of the street, girls who worked at the diner, even a teacher from the school, all with similar stories, all with hidden wounds, some still open. They began to gather in our living room, strong coffee, tired eyes, but with a kind of hope I had never seen before, the hope of those who, for the first time, allowed themselves to exist. But of course, they didn't stop. They slashed the tires of our car, they spray-painted "liar" on our wall, they spread flyers around town saying that I was unstable, that my mother manipulated me, that it was all made up. But the more they yelled, the more people showed up to listen, until, at one of these meetings, someone suggested going further, starting a petition, a movement, gathering the stories, formalizing everything, delivering it to the county court. The idea seemed absurd at first, but it grew. It grew like a good seed that no one notices until it takes root. In less than a week, we had more than 30 women willing to speak out. And that's when I realized something big was coming. But so was the risk, because when their power begins to crack, that's when they become most dangerous. And it was during this interval, this tense truce, that Rick reappeared. I didn't see him, but I was told. He returned to town at dawn and hid at a cousin's house. He was thinner, but the same look, the same posture, and, according to a neighbor, with a gun in the glove compartment. The night he returned started out too hot. One of those nights when the air seems thick, when the wind doesn't even come to ease your breathing. I was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by papers, trying to organize the signatures on the petition, when the light flickered twice. My mother was in the kitchen and froze in mid-step. We looked at each other and said nothing, but we both knew, because there are signs that the soul recognizes without needing to translate. And that flickering light was a sign that the end was near. We went to sleep without turning off any lights. Doors locked, windows secured with wire, curtains closed. But when the shadow wants to come in, it comes in. I woke up to the sound of the gate opening slowly, without haste, then the crack of wood on the porch, as if a familiar weight had stepped on it again. My mother left the room first. I tried to stop her, grabbed her arm, but she looked at me with a strange kind of calm, a firmness I had never seen before. She just said, "Stay here. This fight is mine too." I stood behind the door, my heart beating so loud I could barely hear myself think. The doorknob turned, and then there he was, Rick, same manner, same smell, same disgusting smile, as if time had not passed, as if everything he did was just another ordinary day. He walked in as if he owned the place, as he always did, but there was something different this time. Maybe it was the way my mother looked at him, without lowering her head, without backing down. "You've gone too far, Mary," he said in that voice that tried to be sweet but dripped with venom. "You've turned the whole town against me." She didn't answer. She just crossed her arms. He took a step forward, and that's when he saw the board on the wall. The pages of the petition were pinned to it, with the signatures highlighted. Rick walked over and ripped one of them off, crumpling it in his fist. "This is worthless," he spat. "Just dirty paper full of lies." My mother didn't move, but she spoke. "Every name on there is true, and you know it." Rick laughed, a dry, ugly laugh, like a man who never knew how to lose. Then he took a gun out of his pocket, small, dark, and he pointed it. He didn't tremble, as if he had already decided what he was going to do. I pushed open the bedroom door and screamed. It was instinct. I didn't even think. I just screamed. The sound cut through the air, and for a second he hesitated. And in that second, my mother flew at him. I had never seen her like that before. A shadow, a vilam, a whole body of pain turning into strength. The gun fell to the floor. They rolled around. He screamed. He tried to break free, but she held on tight. I ran, grabbed the gun and pointed it. My hand was shaking so much that I thought I was going to fire accidentally, but I didn't fire. I just screamed too. "Get off her, now!" He stopped. He looked at me with that look that always scared me. But now it just made me sick. My mother moved away, panting, her face marked by a scratch. He was on his knees, panting, sweaty, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, not disguised anger, not a threat, pure fear. The police siren arrived minutes later. Someone had called. Maybe a neighbor, maybe Jeannie's lawyer. When the police entered, they saw the gun on the floor. They saw the state of the house. They saw him in the middle of the room. And they didn't need to ask many questions. They arrested Rick right there. Not as if he were a famous neighbor. They arrested him as if he were the monster he always was. At the police station, they tried to cover it up. They tried to make it seem less serious. But the women, oh my dear, the women wouldn't let them. They all went there, one by one. They took copies of the papers. They lined up in front of the door. They spoke to the local newspapers. They told their stories, with their names, their faces, without any shame, because the shame wasn't ours. It never was. The city became a battlefield, half defended, half condemned. But for the first time, the voices were on the right side, and that was new. It hurt, of course, but it was fair. Rick was indicted. Jesse disappeared. The others who helped him disappeared too, like rats in a burning house. Mrs. Jeannie became almost a heroine, and my mother earned a new name among the neighbors, Courage. But inside us, nothing was erased. There's no way. The marks remain. Some heal crookedly. Others become infected without anyone seeing. I kept waking up at dawn to the sound of footsteps on the porch, even when no one was there. I kept jumping when a car braked on the street. I kept thinking I was going to have to hide. The trial didn't come quickly. Nothing in a small town is quick, especially when it involves the tarnished name of a man with a clean past. They dragged their feet as long as they could. They postponed hearings, lost papers, invented tests, invented excuses. They said it was a matter of time, that justice was a process. But everyone there knew it was fear disguised as bureaucracy. With each new delay, more stories came to light. Anonymous letters arrived in the mail at City Hall. Some were old, others recent. All of them talked about him. All of them confirmed what was already known, only now by more mouths, more hands. And even so, he remained in prison, but comfortable. He never appeared in handcuffs. He was never exposed, because a white, rich, well-connected monster is always treated with kid gloves. My mother and I went to every meeting with a lawyer with the same exhaustion of someone who had lived through a war. He said he was optimistic, that the evidence was strong, that the witnesses were solid. But I saw in his eyes the same thing I saw in everyone else's eyes. Distrust that justice would act without pressure. It was like running a race with your feet tied. You run, but you know you're going to stumble. The city was divided, not only in opinions, but in actions. There were stores that refused to sell us bread. There were people who crossed the street when they saw us, but there were also those who came with kindness, with support, with hugs. Women who had previously hidden themselves began to speak out in public. Young people began to ask more questions about consent, respect, and truth. The school where I had studied hired a psychologist for the first time, not out of kindness, but because of pressure. But the effect was coming, small, slow, But it was coming. I received invitations to give interviews. I refused them all. I didn't want to be a symbol. I didn't want to be a martyr. I just wanted to live without fear of opening the door, without waiting for heavy footsteps in the hallway, without having to sleep with a knife hidden under the mattress. But at the same time, I knew that silence had been my executioner, and that speaking out, even if it hurt, was what would prevent it from continuing. So I spoke. Not on television. I spoke in a small room at a meeting with younger girls. I told them without details, without tears, just the raw truth. One of them cried. Another got up and left. A third stayed until the end, and as she left held my hand. She said nothing, but that touch was as if she had said everything. I'm here. I'm with you. I know. Meanwhile, Rick tried to defend himself. His defense said it was all made up, that I was disturbed, that my mother had fabricated everything, that we wanted money. They even used my lack of friends as evidence. They said I was isolated, strange, that this explained everything. His lawyer, an old man with a soft voice, used pretty words to cover up the dirt. He said they were weak allegations, that the letters could be fake. But every time he spoke, more women stood up. The thing grew out of control. Because when you mess with fear, fear spreads. But when you poke courage, it spreads too. And there, courage was what was beginning to take over. On the eve of the first day of the hearing, I received another letter, handwritten, folded in 4, left in the mailbox without an envelope. It just said, "You shouldn't have gone back there that day," and a dried flower inside, one of those my mother used to plant in the yard. I showed it to her. She said nothing. She took the flower and burned it on the stove. She looked at me with that old tiredness in her eyes and said, "They haven't learned, but they will." In court, the first time I saw Rick again, my stomach turned to stone. He walked in wearing a light-colored suit, his hair combed, his face clean-shaven. He didn't look at anyone. He kept his eyes on the floor, his hands clasped together. He looked like any other citizen. But I knew. I remembered. The room was full. Some familiar faces. Others I had never seen before. Everyone was attentive, whispering. The judge, a tall man, looked tired even before he began, as if he wanted to be somewhere else. But he started anyway. Witnesses spoke. My words were read. The photos were shown. The records were analyzed. The city saw everything. And even with everything laid bare, there were still those who whispered, who grimaced, who muttered that it was an exaggeration. But there were also those who cried, those who held each other's hands, those who finally believed. At the end of the first day, the mother of one of the girls who had disappeared came up to me. She didn't say her daughter's name. She didn't explain anything. She just said, "Thank you," with tears on her face, but firm. And that gave me more strength than any promise of justice. But all this movement, all this shouting, stirred up deeper things, things that had been quiet for a long time, things that no one expected to resurface. And it was there, between one testimony and another, that the truth about my father reappeared. Because there was someone, a former employee of the workshop, who decided to speak up. He decided to tell about my father's last week of life, about the threatening notes, about the tire slash the night before, and that changed everything, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my family, about what happened to my father, about all the years my mother pretended not to know, about the whole town that chose to remain silent, and about what Rick had always been, from the beginning. After the man from the repair shop spoke, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Not even the judge could maintain his composure. It became clear that my father's case was never an accident. And there, in front of everyone, it also became clear that Rick had killed before he even touched me. That shook the town. Many people who had previously been suspicious of me began to suspect him. It was as if only my father's death made them realize the truth. Only when a man's blood was spilled on the floor did they believe that this man was capable of what I had said. The absurdity is that a daughter's word was never worth as much as a dead mechanic's flat tire. That night, there was no conversation, no dinner, just the noise of the fan and my mother's footsteps around the house. She walked in circles, as if looking for something she didn't know where she had put. I let her. Sometimes the body needs to move when the head feels like it's about to explode. I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling, remembering my childhood, the absences, the questions that were never answered, and that's when I understood that our whole story revolved around a hole that no one had the courage to name. My father, his death, the door Rick walked through, everything revolved around that. It was almost midnight when my mother sat on the edge of my bed. No makeup, no scarf, no excuses, just that expression that mixes guilt, exhaustion, and an urgency that can't wait. "I need to tell you something," she said, and just hearing those words made my throat close up, because I knew that what was coming wasn't going to be easy. She took a deep breath, fidgeted with her hands, and said, "That night, the night your father died, I knew he had made an appointment with Rick. They were going to settle a problem, a debt, but also a threat. Your father found out what Rick had been doing with a girl from the workshop. He said he was going to report him. I found out an hour before he left. I asked him not to go. He laughed, kissed my forehead, and left. I waited. I waited until the next day, and then the car was found, without him inside. The body only appeared 2 days later. I knew, but I had no proof, and I had you, small, sick, and me, alone. I couldn't say anything. My head was spinning, but my body wouldn't respond." She continued, "Rick showed up that same week. He offered me help, money, and I accepted. I accepted because I didn't know what else to do. I accepted because I was afraid you would go hungry. But the worst part is that I knew he wasn't the kind of man who would give without asking for something in return. But I pretended. I pretended it was just kindness. I pretended for you, I pretended for myself, and every time he came, I told myself it was just a visit, until the day I realized he wasn't coming for me anymore. He was coming for you, and even then, I didn't act. I kept quiet." She was crying now, not dramatically, but with that quiet, muffled cry that only escapes because it can no longer be contained. I still couldn't look her in the eye. I wanted to scream, to break everything. I wanted to say it was her fault, but something stopped me. Maybe because deep down, I knew. I always knew. That part of it all was omission, cowardice, but it was also desperation. And desperation doesn't choose. It just reacts. She touched my hand and said, "You have every reason to hate me. I hate myself too, but I'm here, and now I'm going to see this through with you, whatever it takes." I closed my eyes, and in that moment, I didn't forgive her, but I didn't reject her either, because there, in that broken woman, was the only person I had left in the world. And sometimes we need what little we have left to keep going. The next day, we returned to court. The whole town seemed to be there. The benches were full, the corridors were full. There were even people outside, people who had never looked me in the face before, people who now made a point of being there, because everyone loves the spectacle of scandal. Everyone wants to see the monster's downfall, as long as they don't have to get involved. Rick entered through the back door, escorted, handcuffed. For the first time, his face marked, his hair messy. He looked around as if he still thought he could turn the tables, as if he still had a card up his sleeve. But there was no one left for him. Not even his lawyer tried to hide his exhaustion. The judge called the parties. The jurors were ready. And it was in this atmosphere of inevitable conclusion that the trial really began. The first few hours were tense. Nervous witnesses, malicious questions from the defense, attempts to disqualify testimony. But with each attack, new confirmation emerged. It was no longer just my word. It was 20, 30 women. It was call records. It was security cameras. It was receipts. It was handwritten letters. It was medical records from the health clinic. Everything lined up. Everything pointed to him until it was my turn. I was called to the stand. I looked ahead, head held high. I looked at him, eyes cold, and I began. I told what I needed to tell. No embellishment, no tears, just the truth. The whole room was silent. I said names, dates, things he said, how he came in, how he threatened me, and at the end I added, he thought I would never open my mouth. He thought fear would silence me forever, but what he forgot is that when we survive, we don't forget. We keep it inside, and one day, we give it back. He didn't react. He just lowered his head. For the first time, I saw him as small, tiny, because his power was silence. And now the silence was no longer his. The day of the sentence dawned muggy, as if the sky had been holding back tears since the day before. The whole city seemed suspended in time. At the courthouse door, people who had never set foot there before now leaned against the walls as if it were an event, some out of curiosity, others out of anger, some out of fear, but everyone was there to see if justice was just a word, or if, by some miracle, it would turn into action. I went with my mother. We were both silent. No attempt at consolation, just the certainty that, whatever happened, what had to be said had already been said. There was no more silence inside us. We went in and sat in the same row as always. Mrs. Jeannie was there, so was Mrs. Bet, women who carried the fight as if it were their own. And in a way, it was, because when one woman speaks, others bleed with her. Rick entered in handcuffs, but with his usual demeanor, looking at the floor, avoiding eye contact. I didn't expect remorse, nor excuses. I just wanted him to listen. I wanted every word of the sentence to hit him like a punch, because he didn't just kill my father. He killed parts of me that never came back, and he destroyed the peace of so many people who may never sleep soundly again. The judge read everything with that coldness that only those who see a lot of tragedy can maintain. She said that after hearing all sides, after reviewing the evidence, after considering testimony and evidence, the court found Richard Allen guilty on multiple charges. And then came the numbers. Years, decades, one dry sound after another. I didn't understand everything. I didn't even count. I just closed my eyes and breathed. It wasn't relief. It was something else. Something between victory and mourning. Because winning like this isn't winning. It's just surviving. Then came the hugs, the greetings, the words of encouragement. I thanked them, with my head, with my eyes, but inside I just wanted to leave. I went out the back door where no one was waiting. I walked to the field behind the old school, the same one where I used to hide when I was a child. I sat on the ground, leaned against the crooked tree, and cried. For the first time, I cried for real. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was everything together, as if all the years had collapsed on me in a single second. My mother found me there. She didn't say anything. She sat down next to me, covered me with her shawl, and stayed. And that's how we ended the day, sitting on the ground, covered in dust, watching the sun slowly disappear over the horizon. We had won, they say, but inside us there was still a lot that couldn't be fixed, and maybe it never will. But there, with the silence no longer threatening, I understood that pain changes. It doesn't go away, but it learns to breathe with us. And little by little, we fill the empty spaces with new things, not to forget, but to move on. The following months were strange. We made the news, reports, a case study. Students, reporters, even politicians came wanting to shake our hands. I refused almost everything. I spoke to some girls. I participated in a circle at a school in a neighboring town. I saw in their faces the same thing I had carried for years: doubt, fear, silence. But I also saw strength, and that gave me some hope, not for me, but for them. Rick tried to appeal. Of course he did, but it didn't work. He stayed, erased, forgotten, as it should always have been. Jesse, no one has ever seen him again. Some say he left for Texas. Others say he changed his name. It doesn't matter to me. Those who live on the run are already imprisoned, and those who do what he did never sleep in peace. The house was renovated. We painted the walls, replaced the windows. Some chickens still run away. The porch got new plants. My mother started crocheting again. Sometimes she calls me to sit with her, and we sit there without talking much, just listening to the noise from the street. New people moved to town. Old people left. The church started preaching about respect. The school added classes on protection, small victories, but victories nonetheless. As for me, I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes. I'm still afraid of doors slamming, but I feel lighter. I survived the kind of hell that small towns like to hide. And if you've made it this far, my dear, thank you for listening to me. because telling you all this is reliving the fear. And if one day you feel like you can't take it anymore, remember, even the dirtiest ground can become a starting point. Just don't be silent. Never.